Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, Ninja of Ghoul School, written by Mightiest Battle. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin. Scooby-Doo plus Naruto crossover. Third POV. 3 weeks ago Naruto, a 10-year-old boy, was lying low as he hid inside a cart, leaving Konoha. His whiskered face and new blue slit eyes both showed relief. His red and blonde mixed hair weighed down from the early morning rain. He had a bag of sealing scrolls he'd stolen from his father's study. He took all the training scrolls along with the scroll of sealing. Naruto had already mastered the basics and some chunin level skills, thinking it would help him survive the streets of Konoha, and he was glad he had. He had most of his father's and mother's original jutsu and hundreds of training scrolls and jutsu from the village. He'd also taken all the money his father kept in the wall safe, well over 1 billion yen. He'd had enough of how his family and village treated him. He'd been living off the kindness of the Uchiha matriarch and the few people who were kind to him. He'd been beaten, starved, neglected, and disowned once they saw he didn't want to be like them. He didn't want to have to kill people. He was willing to fight but didn't believe killing was right. But his brothers were just like them. Naruto had heard this cart was going to the port of Fire Country and heading for New Orleans. Deciding to try and get some sleep, Naruto curled up to try and get some sleep. Only a little longer. Naruto thought as he slowly went to sleep, unaware of the fire his leaving Konoha would light. A few hours later, had arrived at the port, and Naruto slipped away after seeing the ship he wanted. It was a massive ship made of iron and was at least 5 times bigger than the wooden ships. Naruto had woken up before they arrived and heard that they'd need to exchange the yen for cash from the US. Naruto followed them to a huge building and transformed into a middle-aged merchant. Naruto walked in and saw lines leading to counters. Naruto got in the line, and after 20 minutes, Naruto was at the front of the line. "Hello sir. What amount and country currency do you need to exchange for?" Naruto pulled out the mid-sized scroll and set it down. "A little over 1 billion yen to US currency please." Her eyes widened, then nodded as she looked at him. "Very good sir, but, I'll need to take this upstairs to have it exchanged." "We'll have you wait in a side-off please." Naruto nodded. She took the scroll and quickly led Naruto to a room. An hour later, the woman came back with a new scroll. Naruto had unsealed it at the table in the room and smiled, seeing the mountain of cash. The woman held out some paperwork, and he took it and read over it quickly. The total had come out to just shy of 6.5 million in $100 bills. Naruto resealed them and thanked her. She thanked him for his time, and he returned to see the ship still waiting. Naruto transformed back and then ran off to the market. Naruto bought and sealed a few weeks' worth of food and water with the last of his yen. Once done, he returned to the ship and hid among the cargo about to be loaded. Naruto got on board the ship just as it was starting to launch. Naruto had to sneak around the ship for almost 3 weeks to use the bathroom or showers, but he also got lucky sometimes. He snagged extra food, even a few blankets and a pillow. Naruto had made a hanging bed out of ropes and used the extra blankets as bedding. He was also finally gaining weight and doing basic workouts to build muscle. He didn't know what the US was like, so he wanted to be as ready as possible. Little did he know he'd meet the love of his life in a matter of weeks. Naruto current POV. Naruto smiled as he walked away from the port. He'd relaxed, and his eyes returned to the round pupils. He walked into a small town and saw people of all shapes and sizes and hair colors. He saw cars for the first time, and people noticed the thin boy. A few mothers stopped, looked at his torn-up and dirty clothes, and saw he was still too thin but had a little weight. They also looked at the whisker marks on his face, wondering if they were scars. But one woman who saw him stopped and gasped when she saw the marks. She silently followed him, hoping she was wrong, but she would know if he was drawn to her family's swamp. There's no way. Naruto got to the forest and stopped when he felt a pull. He looked to his right, and Naruto felt something calling him. Naruto started to walk that way, and as he got closer, he noticed the green trees turning dead. The grass was gone, and the ground was gray and hard. The trees looked like they had scary faces, and the branches looked like reaching hands. But the forest felt more natural to him. Soon, Naruto came to a swamp, and Naruto could feel the call was stronger than ever. Naruto also felt safe here, unlike when he was in Konoha. Why do I feel safe here? I think I can explain that to you, young man. Naruto jumped and turned fast and saw a woman behind him. Naruto raised his arm, and claws suddenly came from his fingers. Naruto screamed as he dropped down to the ground, fear in his eyes as they turned back to slits. The woman quickly rushed over, knowing this boy didn't know what was happening. The woman believed that his young boy had monster blood and didn't know it. Sweetie, calm down and breath. Naruto, panicking, nodded as he tried to take a deep breath. It was ragged and shaky as he breathed out. The kind woman rubbed his back as his claws retracted and his eyes normalized. The woman smiled as she looked down at Naruto. She rubbed Naruto's back, trying to help him as he calmed down. After a few minutes, Naruto calmed down and realized the woman had started to hug him. Naruto relaxed as she pulled back and looked down at him. Better now, sweetie. Naruto nodded, and she smiled as she stood up and helped him to his feet. Naruto backed up a little and grabbed his bag. Sweetie, do you have someone I can talk to? Naruto didn't answer, and the woman frowned as she looked down at him. Do you have any family in town? Naruto still didn't respond but then nodded his head no. The woman sighed as she reached down and grabbed his hand. Come with me, sweetie, let's return to my finishing school, and maybe me and my girls when they return next week can help. I've helped more than a few young girls with strange powers, and some girls around your own age may help as well. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. Why, you mean, some kids will want to be near me? I won't be hit for coming close to them, right? Naruto watched as horror filled her face as she looked down at him. She pulled him into a tight hug and picked him up. Good heavens, no. What has happened to you to think like this? Naruto didn't answer, and she decided his past could wait for now. Well, sweetheart. Let's forget the past for right now. My name is Miss Grimwood. What is your name? Naruto looked at her for a minute before he spoke. Naruto. Miss Grimwood smiled as she set him back down. She grabbed his hand and then his bag. Well, let's head for my finishing school, young man, and I'll get you some warm food. Naruto nodded as Miss Grimwood started to lead him back to the town where the car she used for grocery shopping. Soon, they got to town, and the woman helped Naruto to the car. Naruto was looking at the full-size Toyota on the back with a symbol he didn't know. Miss Grimwood helped Naruto in and set his bag at his feet. Naruto looked around inside the van and saw many brown paper bags. Miss Grimwood buckled him up, walked around, and entered the driver's seat. She started the car, and they were on their way. Naruto is on his way to his new life. So Naruto, do you have a favorite food? Naruto looked at Miss Grimwood and nodded as he looked at her. I like ramen. Miss Grimwood nodded as they turned off the main road onto a dirt one. After an hour of driving down dirt roads, Naruto saw them coming up for a large Victorian-style castle. As they got close, Naruto saw a sign. Miss Grimwood's finishing school for girls. As they drove by, a drawbridge came down, and Naruto looked down at a moat as they drove on the bridge. Miss Grimwood drowns around the back and parked in a small cave-like garage. Miss Grimwood unbuckled and helped Naruto unbuckle before she asked him to bring in the groceries. Naruto moved the bags to the back door, and as he did Miss Grimwood took them into the school. When they were done, Miss Grimwood called for him to come inside. Naruto walked into the school, his bag thrown over his back. In Konoha, 4 weeks ago Mikoto and the rest of the Uchiha clan were tearing the village apart, with Might Guy, Kakashi, Enko, Itachi, Kurenai, Yugao, the third Hokage, and many other Anbu helping. The Ichiraku were tearing the shopping district apart, trying to find him. Soon, the ninjas and restaurant owners gathered in the village center. None of them had found him. But as they were about to search the surrounding forest, Mikoto heard the voice of the last person she wanted to hear. "What's got everyone gathered?" Mikoto glared back as she looked at Kushina with her two brats, Zuko and Menma, standing at her sides. "Beat it, Uzumaki. We don't have time for you." Kushina looked like she had been slapped as her best friend turned her back on her. Kushina walked over, her sons following her. "Mikoto, what is with the anger? I know I haven't done anything to warrant it." Mikoto looked at her with a deep frown on her face. "We're looking for Naruto. He has been gone for weeks. So excuse me if I'm a little angry with his mother who doesn't seem to have known." Kushina looked confused for a second before her eyes widened. Then, she dropped her bags and quickly grabbed her two sons by the hand. Everyone watched as she rushed to the Hokage tower, but the large group only watched as she rushed away with her two brats. Soon, Kakashi spoke up. "Forget them for now, let's go search the forest, and I pray he didn't go into it but the forest of death as well." Everyone nodded. Then the Umbu and former Hokage rushed off to the forest of death. While they moved, the Uchiha clan headed for the gates. At Hokage tower, when she got to the door, Kushina rushed to her husband's office and locked it in. She pulled her boys in with her and saw her husband Minato with his teacher and Tsunade in the room. "Minato. Naruto is missing." The three powerful ninja looked at her for a few seconds before all their eyes widened. "What?" Minato yelled as he stood, and Jiraiya quickly moved to a window. "I'll take some Umbu and start a search." Kushina stopped him when she spoke. "There is already a search going on. The whole Uchiha clan is searching along with the Hiruzen, Mikoto, Kakashi, Anko, Itachi, Guy, Kurenai and Yugao among them. Mikoto is also anger and the looks on their faces. They're panicking and more than a few looked ready for a fight." That made all three look shocked as they looked at her. "But, how did they know to start looking?" Minato asked, scared he wouldn't like the answer. Kushina started to tear up as she looked at them. Her other sons looked at her like it wasn't their problem. And Mikoto said he's been gone for weeks. "We didn't know one of our sons was gone." Kushina finally broke down and fell to her knees. Minato and Tsunade were at her side, while Menma and Zuko still didn't seem to understand. They'd known the loser was gone and thought it was good. Little did they know the hell would fall on them later in life. With Naruto, a week later, Naruto laughed as a hand floated away quickly as the newly hatched dragon named Matches chased her. Naruto stopped laughing and grabbed the little dragon as he ran by them. Naruto pulled him onto his lap. The dragon looked up at him and put his webbed hands on Naruto's stomach as he looked up. "Hey, little guy." The small dragon softly growled up at him, and Naruto laughed more. Naruto ran his hand over his head and back. Matches rubbed the side of his head into Naruto's stomach as he liked the petting. I'm happy to see the boys getting along." Naruto looked over and saw Miss Grimwood and saw someone behind her. She was a vaguely reptilian monster with messy aubergine hair and clawed hands. She looked around from behind Miss Grimwood. She has large eyes with yellow scaras, freckles at the sides of her face and white fanged teeth. Miss Grimwood moved her arm back and pushed her around the front. She was dressed in torn-up jeans and a beat-up white shirt. But Naruto saw the same look he had back in Konoha. "Come now, Susie. Naruto is going to be living here with us for the foreseeable future like all of you." Naruto smiled and waved at her, his eyes turning slight and red while his whiskers grew darker. Naruto's claws grew, and he didn't freak out this time. Miss Grimwood had explained that this was natural and there was no need to fear. When Susie saw he wasn't just some human, she let out a little laugh and smile. She moved closer to Naruto. Naruto kept his smile as he moved over a little, making room for her. She got on the couch and looked down at the little dragon. "His name is Matches. You want to hold him?" Susie nodded and she reached down and grabbed him under his little arms. She picked him up, and she kicked his little legs, and he showed a small fanged smile. Naruto watched as she played with the little dragon. Naruto gave her hair a closer look and saw it was a little dirty but was well taken care of. You have real pretty hair and I like your eye color. Susie blushed and looked away, and Naruto saw something moving behind her. He looked back and saw a small tail wagging. Seeing that, he laughed a little more. Then, as Naruto started talking with her, 3 more young monster girls walked into the room. Miss Grimwood saw the rest of this year's class before she spoke up. "Oh, Naruto, Susie, these are the rest of your new friends." Naruto and Susie looked away from each other and looked at the girls. One was a phantom-like girl. She was dressed in a blue dress with pale blue skin. She was white with a light blue stripe going through the center. She had on white fur-lined boots. The second was a noble-looking girl with purple hair on the sides with a center of light gray hair. She wore an ankle-length purple dress, and Naruto saw small fangs from her upper lips. She had on some flip-flops that were a purple and gray mix. The last girl was the tallest and looked like she was stitched together, and she had on a green dress with a tan undershirt. Her hair was square with black edges and a pure white center up the middle. All looked like they were 10 or 11. Miss Grimwood spoke up after seeing Naruto looking them over. Knowing he was seeing if he could trust them. "Naruto, Susie. These are Sibella, Elsa Frankenstein and Phantasma." Susie waved at them, and Naruto nodded at them while scratching matches on his chin. As Naruto looked at these girls, he hoped they would become his friends. 2 weeks later Naruto was running through the hall chasing Matches as he stole the scroll he'd been reading. Matches ran into a room. Naruto chased him in and stopped seeing Miss Grimwood and the girls in the middle of a dance class. Naruto laughed as he looked at them and saw Matches behind Miss Grimwood. "Sorry to bother everyone, but Matches stole my scroll and I want it back." Miss Grimwood nodded as she looked down at Matches. "You heard him, Matches. Give back his scroll." The young dragon growled and gripped a little before he turned. "Matches." He huffed at Miss Grimwood's warning tone and threw the scroll over. Naruto caught it before Elsa spoke up. "What is written on the scroll?" Naruto looked at her and smiled. "A jutsu called Shadow Clones." "Oh, well, why don't you come up and show us, Naruto? We could stand a short break." All the girls looked at him, and he smiled as he put the scroll down and made the ram sign. "This isn't the Shadow Clone Jutsu but a weaker version I can show called the Clone Jutsu." Naruto flared his chakra, and they all looked at him, shocked, as blue energy erupted from his body. It kicked up a slight wind before Naruto spoke. "Bunshin no Jutsu." 40 puffs of smoke erupted around the room, and all the girls and Miss Grimwood were stunned to see 40 Naruto clones. They could see they were pale, and a few looked sick. "I still can't make them all perfect, but high-level control isn't my specialty. Raw power is what I have in spades. But my control is only going to get better as time goes on. And, once the Shadow Clone Jutsu is MSTR, I'll be able to increase my training 100-fold. Duh, how is that going to work?" Naruto looked at Elsa and smiled. He explained that the Shadow Clone's Jutsu were used to gather information. He would receive the memories and experiences of the clones. So, one training day multiplied by how many clones he could make. But then, he saw the smile on Miss Grimwood's face. "Oh, my, when you MSTR that jutsu thing we can do ballroom dancing and the waltz and even a tango. I can even have you learn an instrument, maybe a violin." Naruto hearing those words made him regret telling them this. Naruto looked at Susie and saw her playing with her shirt edge. Then, she looked at Naruto and Miss Grimwood. "I think a guitar would suit Naruto better." Miss Grimwood nodded and then looked at Hand. "Hand, be a dear and go find the guitar in the music room." Hand imitated a nod before floating out of the room. Naruto had learned that this meant for him to wait. But after a minute, Susie walked over, and Naruto smiled at her. He looked around and smiled as he spotted chairs lined up along the wall. Naruto grabbed her hand, and Susie blushed and let Naruto pull her along. They sat down, and the other girls were watching smiled. Susie was quieter than the rest but was sweet once you broke through her outer shell. But they could all see that she was more open with Naruto. Something told everyone these two were going to be inseparable. Soon, Hand was back with a slightly beaten-up guitar. Naruto thanked Hand and looked down at it. The wood had a dark brown stain with a few scratches over both sides, looking like his whisker marks. I guess this will be something to do to relax when I'm not training or in class with you all. All the girls nodded, and Naruto placed the guitar in the seat next to him. He looked at Susie and smiled. When I learn to play well, you pick the first song. Susie, still blushing, nodded as she looked at him. Naruto patted her forearm, got out of the seat, and took the scroll and guitar. But he stopped and looked at Miss Grimwood. He had been thinking about telling her about the money and his history. He decided to talk to her, maybe she could help him make more. I'll be in my room, and Miss Grimwood, can we talk later? Miss Grimwood looked surprised but quickly nodded her head. Naruto hadn't told her much, if he wanted to talk, she would jump on it. Susie was similar, but making ground with one could also lead to the other giving ground. 1 month later Miss Grimwood had been shocked when Naruto told her about his younger life. The starvation, both emotional and physical, the neglect, the beatings, and how only a few people reached out to hello him with kindness. Miss Grimwood had broken down and hugged Naruto, saying she was so sorry for what he'd had to endure. Once she'd calmed down, he pulled out the scroll holding the money. He explained how much was in the scroll, and Miss Grimwood was shocked at what he'd done but understood. They went and made a bank about. He needed money to survive and hide. But when he explained what he wanted her help with, she knew how to make it grow safely. On the next day off of class, Miss Grimwood took them all into town. The girls wore bracelets, making them look like human versions of themselves, but Naruto didn't like it. But he stopped when he saw Susie's human form. She had tan skin and had her eyes hidden behind her hair. She'd driven them all to a large building. She dropped them off at the town's library and handed out their monthly allowances if they wanted something to eat or drink. She told them she would be back in an hour at the latest. Come on Naruto. Susie and Elsa grabbed his arms. They pulled him into the library, and Naruto kept his eyes on the girls. He may be young, but he could fight if need be. After 20 minutes, they were all at a table reading. Naruto was reading a book about martial arts from around the world. Two that seemed perfect for him stood out, were karate and boxing. Naruto had returned to the shelves and returned with books on both. He looked around and saw nobody but the girls were around. He made 2 shadow clones, the girls looked at them and watched as they transformed. Now, they looked like 2 kids Naruto had seen in Konoha. They took the books and started to read. You finally mastered that jutsu. Naruto nodded as he went back to his book. No, I have been experimenting with my chakra control not to make so many. Up to this point, I've been using them to help me train my control and what taijutsu I learned from Gai, Jiji, and Kakashi. But I don't know the full styles of theirs. I still need more to get stronger if I need to protect the school or myself. All the girls watched him as he and his clones read. They all smiled as they looked at him. But Susie's smile seemed a little sweeter than the others. After another hour Miss Grimwood had returned, and the group checked out their books. Miss Grimwood had noticed the books Naruto had. She frowned but understood that his past would make him want to learn self-defense. But Fanty laughed as she explained what he'd said once they were in the van. Miss Grimwood had laughed and called Naruto their valiant warrior and a true gentleman. All the girls laughed as he buried his blushing face into his hands. Susie and Sabella patted his back as he muttered his promise of revenge for this embarrassment. Soon, they returned to the school, and Miss Grimwood took him to her office. She explained that she'd set up a stock investment account with all but 500,000 of the money he'd had. She had set it up to grow and reinvest his money steadily and safely over the next 8 years with an annual rate of 25%. So, by the time he was an adult, he'd have a very nice nest egg and a future for himself, plus a girlfriend or wife if he was smart. Naruto had blushed, and he thought of Susie. Oh my. Naruto looked at her and saw the smile on Miss Grimwood's face. That blush. Don't tell me you already like one of my girls. Naruto growled and huffed as more of his feral traits emerged. Miss Grimwood laughed and waved her other hand while covering her mouth. Oh my boy, you have a little crush. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Naruto puffed up his cheeks and then excused himself, leaving the laughing woman behind him. Naruto headed for his room but didn't notice small golden eyes watching him from around a corner. 4 years later Naruto jumped through the trees. Matches, running along under him, a young dragon of 3'7" in height. In the last 4 years, Naruto had mastered almost all the scrolls with the help of his shadow clones. He'd also taken up classes for both boxing and karate. He was an intermediate in boxing lessons, and while using reinforced clones, he was already a red belt in karate. His teachers were shocked when they found out he was learning both disciplines. They were shocked by how he managed to keep up with both and asked why he needed both. Explained his past and how he wanted to protect those who picked him up when he fell and to show greatness can come from anyone. By the end, the 2 teachers were nearly crying and promised he'd become as strong as he needed to be to do as he wished. They also promised each other that if they ever got their hands on his biological parents, those who'd hurt him would pay. I'm ringing. He stopped on a high branch and pulled out his phone, a Galaxy. He answered the call, seeing that it was Miss Grimwood. Yes, ma'am. Naruto, the girls are coming soon, so there's no need for you 2 to keep patrolling the swamp. We both know Susie and the girls won't be happy if you are not here when they arrive. Also, don't just jump out of nowhere again. We have a new girl joining us. Naruto sighed as he turned and spoke. Coming, ma'am. But, you know, we've been having trouble with the young humans coming into the swamp over the last few years. Miss Grimwood sighed and knew he was right. The town's teenagers were once again poking around in her family's swamp. And now, with the new boys' military school being built nearby, Naruto and Matches had grown defensive of their home. I know my boys are dutiful, and I'm ever so grateful for you too, but you need not do this every day. Naruto laughed as he dropped down and patted Match's head as he stood tall at 5'5". Well, be there in 10, Miss Grimwood. Okay my boy, be safe. Naruto ended the call, and Naruto looked at his dragon friend. Come on, pal. The girls will be here soon, and a new girl is coming. We need to make sure that the new girl and our friends will be safe. Matches nodded his head. Yeah. The 2 took off, and Naruto watched as the young dragon kept pace with him. As they ran, they quickly reached the small royal red Honeycrisp orchard and garden Naruto had planted 3 years ago. They were flowering this year and smiled as they would fruit this year. Naruto laughed as he thought back to the first week in Ghoul School. The girls were shocked to learn he was half a monster, and while he could eat some of their foods, need fresh foods to stay healthy. He'd also been selling whatever he couldn't eat from the garden through Miss Grimwood. She'd taken them to the flea market on weekends, and they'd be sold out quickly. It was only a few $100s a month, but it was something. Something he used for his lessons, and whatever was left went into his savings. Naruto had only spent around 60,000 of his 500,000 on his classes, equipment, and some updates to the school. Miss Grimwood had been shocked. Then, he put the money up to update the plumbing and new electrics, restored the kitchen, and had all the rooms while keeping the feel of the school. The monster crews were incredibly hardworking. Naruto was snapped out of his thoughts. Matches stopped in front of Naruto, and Naruto fell over Matches. The 2 were in a small pile. Crud. Naruto quickly jumped up, knowing what was coming. Matches jumped up, roaring out some flames coming from his mouth. Matches was hot on Naruto's tail, and they both heard the girls laughing and a few howls. Naruto jumped onto the roof of the school. Matches growled as he prowled around on the ground under him. Naruto saw his friends and their fathers down on the ground, but Susie was always beside Miss Grimwood alone. Ha ha ha. Naruto frowned as he looked at Fanty as she floated through the roof. Brother Naruto. Glad to see you still not dragging you feet. Bawahaha. Naruto snorted and laughed as he pulled her into a hug. Fanty laughed as she wrapped herself around Naruto. Naruto laughed as she tickled him as she moved around. He laughed, waved his hands down, and they ran through her phantom body. Soon, she let him go, and they returned to the ground. Still annoyed, Matches slapped Naruto with his tail, and Naruto knew the young dragon would let it go easily. Ah, the young guard of Ghoul School. Naruto moved to the side as Matches tried to hit him with his tail again. Ah, Lord Dracula, a pleasure to see you again. The Count bowed while Sabella laughed as Matches stomped off. Next, Elsa and her father walked over, and Frankenstein Sr. patted Naruto's shoulder. Good to see you again, young man. Naruto nodded to him while a set of werewolves walked over. The Phantom appeared beside him. Young man, can we count of you to keep our girls safe for another school year? Naruto laughed as he looked at the Phantom. Have me and Matches failed yet? The Phantom laughed as he looked at him, and then a smaller furry hand grabbed his breaths. Naruto looked down and saw a small werewolf girl. She was short, with light brown fur, curly, bright orange hair, and eyes with yellow sclerae and red irises. Her outfit consisted of a blue dress with cut-off sleeves and a light blue bow tie. She was young, about 5 at the oldest. Naruto smiled, kneeled, and looked her in the eye. Well, hello. It seemed I now have a fearsome and fearless werewolf on my hands. She smiled, showing off some canine-like teeth. Naruto wrapped his arm behind her knee and held her back with his other hand. He picked her up as he stood. She smiled as she put her hands on his upper chest. She smiled as she looked at her father. Papa. Naruto smiled as the wolfman smiled at his daughter, then she looked at him. I've never seen a human this close before. Naruto's smile turned to a smirk as he looked at her. First, little miss, I need a name, and second, I'm not normal human. She nodded before she spoke up. I'm Winnie, Winnie the werewolf. Naruto smiled again as he spoke to her. Well, it's nice to meet you, Winnie. I'm Naruto Uzumaki and I'm a half-monster. Winnie looked at him confused, then her eyes widened when Naruto flared his chakra, and his feral features came out. Naruto's muscles grew as his whiskers darkened and his fangs grew out. His claws grew out as his hair turned full red, as his eyes turned into slits and turned blood red. Despite his face looking fearsome, his eyes showed kindness. Winnie and her father were shocked to see this transformation. Winnie had a wide smile as she looked at him. Are you a werewolf too? Naruto chuckled as he turned back into his normal state. I'm not, sure, little lady. I was raised among some rather mean humans and never met another monster until a few years ago. But, that boring story isn't meant for a young lady like you. So why don't you go and have a look around? Winnie nodded as he sat her down. She nodded as she quickly grabbed her father's hand. Come on, Papa. The wolfman nodded before he gave Naruto the same look he'd gotten from the others. The look said it all. He knew what I meant by mean humans. The wolves walked with Miss Grimwood to the school building. And Naruto sighed as a set of arms wrapped around him. Naruto saw purple scales and smiled as he patted her forearms. The other, seeing this, moved to the school. They'd all seen this two's budding romance and wanted to see it bloom. Thanks, Susie. She smiled as she pulled back slightly, and they noticed the others were gone. They looked at each other and then noticed they were still touching. They both blushed and quickly pulled apart. Susie looked away and ground while Naruto studied the swamp with great interest. Soon, they were walking to the school, Susie walking close to him. Naruto was also looking her over as they walked. The others were in newer versions of the same clothes. Susie wore a new white shirt with a purple and black flannel button-up. She wore black jeans with her hair pulled back into a ponytail with some flip-flops on. Naruto looked down at himself and saw he was in a white shirt with a dress vest on a black front, a royal purple back, and a black gaiter on his back. His jeans were black with holes in the knees, and his red belt was on. He wore army-style combat boots and black tactical knives tied to his forelegs. His hair was left hanging down his back. His heart had gone from spiky to wavy as it started to turn more red like his biological mother. But, Naruto looked back at Susie. "You look good." Susie stopped and looked at him, a blush on her face growing slightly brighter. "You look good too, Naruto." Naruto smiled as they walked into the school. 3 weeks later Naruto yawned as he walked to the dancing studio. Naruto had sent reinforced clones off to his lessons while he moved to help refresh the girls with a waltz and tango. The Fanti, Elsa, Sabella and Susie long since learned a simple version of ballroom dancing. But, Winnie was too young for such dances and was going to start with ballet like the others had. Naruto walked into his studio and stopped. Susie was sitting in the room looked at a photo. Naruto walked close and froze when he saw the photo. It was a family photo. There was a woman who looked like a copy of Susie with a man of the same race with green scales with black hair. In front of them was a boy that looked like the man and Susie off to the side. He could see she was in much poorer quality clothes than the rest of the family. "So, we have much more in common than I ever thought." Susie turned and saw Naruto standing there. An understanding smile on his face. He sat down beside her and held a hand out to her. "I think it's time we both get out past off our hearts." Susie looked at him and she nodded. Susie trusted Naruto as he was always so kind to her and never ratted her out when she snuck extra food. Naruto had Susie talk about her past and he learned that she was the firstborn but, that boy her parents wanted. She wasn't the heir her family wanted. She was fed just enough to keep her alive. She was given clothes that at times were third or something fourth hands. How she'd sleep in the basement when she was at home and was kept away from her family's social life. But the end Susie was near crying. Naruto pulled her into a hug and she buried her head into his chest. He handed his hand on the back of her head and just let her cry it out. After a few minutes Susie got control of herself again and thanked him for letting get that out of her system. Not moving to pull away from his warm hug. Thanks Naruto, I really needed that." Naruto smiled as he patted her head. "I know, my past isn't so different but, I had 2 brothers and parents who starved me, neglected me and beat me when I tried to improve myself. But, unlike you they didn't stop others from attacking me. I had to dodge mobs of humans with torches, weapons and jutsus all of who wanted to kill me. All for reasons I still don't know and to be honest don't care anymore. I'm just glad to be here now with everyone at this ghoul school. And I can promise this, while I'm here everyone here will be safe and sound. With enough food to eat yourself sick." Susie laughed as she pulled back and froze as she looked at the door. Naruto turned back and saw a sigh that made his blood run cold. Standing there were all the girls and Miss Grimwood. Before Naruto or Susie could say anything they were in the middle of a massive group hug of crying girls. Miss Grimwood had both their head pressed into her chest as she cried and planned to rain down hell on Susie's family reputation. As well, as find out where Naruto had come from to make sure the local monsters knew where to start taking victims from. Scooby-Doo plus Naruto crossover 4 years later. Naruto sighed as he sat on the castle's roof. His long hair waved in the air, and his new third-degree black belt was tied around his waist. His hair was now the same shade of red as his biological mother's, and he'd taken to be in his feral state all the time unless he was going to be around other humans. "There you are." Naruto looked back and smiled, seeing Susie leaning out a window. She climbed out onto the roof and walked over to Naruto. With a nice bubble butt. She had her hair in a ponytail resting over her shoulder. She was dressed like she always was. Susie's white shirt strained against her triple D cup, and her wide hips and bubble but were stretching the breathes to the limits. Her eyes had turned a bright green with a slight yellow at the edges. Her hair was tied back into a long ponytail. Keep the eyes up, Naruto. I'm not 18 yet. Naruto laughed and nodded his head. That would change in a few hours. She'd turn 18, and this year, she didn't have to be near that family of hers again. Miss Grimwood had offered her a job as the coach of the school. Naruto had pushed for her to take the job as he'd been officially hired as the head of security for the school after another new girl came. A young mummy girl named Tanis came to the school. Naruto also felt his world brighten when she and Winnie started calling him their big bro. So, what are your plans for this summer, Naruto? Susie asked as she walked up to Naruto and wrapped an arm around Naruto's right arm. Naruto smiled as he looked down at her. Naruto stood 5 inches taller than her already impressive 5'9". Naruto patted her hand, and she smiled up at him. The two were so comfortable with each other and inseparable since they shared their past. Naruto led her over to his sitting spot, and they sat down while they looked over the swamp. Susie rested her head on Naruto's shoulder, and Naruto had an arm wrapped around her shoulder. While they sat there, the other ghouls and Miss Grimwood were watching them. Oh, I'm so happy for Susie and Big Bro. But, man, he needs to kick her father and brother's butts. I wish they'd just come here so Big Bro can lose it on them. Everyone nodded as they looked at the two. Miss Grimwood had reported what she heard to the Monster Council and had been granted emergency custody of Susie. After 2 months, the Monster Council decided it would be best for Susie to live with a family member, and her family was ordered to keep paying for her education until she was 18. From what they heard, they were more than angry their reputation about their secret daughter being taken from them. But, all the girls' fathers being on the council made it impossible to do anything while she was at school. Then Naruto decided to ask Susie a question he'd wanted to ask. Don't really have any plans. But since you're turning 18 this evening, do you maybe need help getting whatever you have left at your family home this summer? Maybe watch me beat down that father and brother. Susie laughed as she nodded her head. You know, that sounds like a plan, and maybe on the ship ride over we can have some fun. Naruto looked at her, surprised. You have to sail here. Susie nodded as she spoke. Yeah, my hometown is in the Land of River in the Element Nations. We'll just have to go through Land of Fire. Naruto stiffened, and Susie felt it. The other girls saw his free arm hand ball up into a fist. Susie, the girls, and Miss Grimwood jumped when red chakra erupted from his fist. Naruto. Naruto snapped out of it and forced himself to relax. He took a few deep breaths and nodded as he looked at Susie. Sorry. I didn't think I'd ever hear about the Element Nations again. That caught everyone's attention, and Susie raised an eyebrow as she looked at him. I'd guessed you knew about the nations, given you knew about chakra and jutsu, but I didn't expect that reaction. Naruto sighed as he rubbed her shoulder before he stood up. Susie looked at him as he turned and walked to the roof's edge. Naruto rubbed his face, his small beard still feeling strange against his hand. DMN it had to be the Land of Fire. Everyone's eyes widened, having never heard Naruto cussing. This wasn't the kind and quiet Naruto they knew. Naruto sighed and turned to look at Susie. Sorry, but my old home is in Land of Fire. I just never thought I'd hear about it again. I try to avoid thinking about it. Everyone saw the reason for the reaction and understood it. They all knew, but Tanis only knew that cruel humans had hurt Naruto badly. The shy girl was upset and angry with the humans who hurt her big bro. So, to hear that their brother wanted to help Susie, he may have to face those who'd harmed him. They all knew he was strong but didn't know the full range of his abilities. They didn't know Naruto had finally mastered all the jutsus he'd taken. Can we help? Naruto looked at Sabella as she moved to the roof. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he looked at her. He frowned as he looked at her. Sabella, while I'm sure you'd all could be a great deal of help most any other time. Not in this case. If I'm found in the land of fire there will be quite the nasty fight. It may very well come down to fight to the death. We all know what some humans can do when they hate enough. They all knew he was right. Some humans turned into hunters for several reasons. The others and Miss Grimwood looked at Susie. She seemed to be the only one who knew about these elemental nations. But she didn't turn to look at them. They guessed she was upset that she'd made Naruto think about bad memories. Neither of them liked to think about their pasts. Then what about my father? He has many powerful vampires under his command. I'm sure if I send him a letter he'd be willing to help. Yeah. My papa would help by sending a few of our werewolf warriors. Naruto nodded his head as he looked at them. Girls, I'm truly happy to hear that you two want to help. But, the ninja villages of the Land of Fire would stop at nothing to use your warriors as tools or breeding stock. Tannis didn't understand what breeding stock was, but when she saw all the others looking sick, she knew it was bad. No, if we go best, we go alone and just get through Land of Fire as quickly as possible. Maybe it's time to buy a car. Heaven knows it would be a hell of a lot faster, but it screamed come and get us too. All the others looked at the two and decided it would be best to leave them to discuss this. Naruto sat back down next to Susie, and she grabbed his hand. I am sorry to have dragged up your past, I didn't know. Naruto sighed and turned his hand, squeezing her hand. No, I'm sorry. I just snapped. I know you didn't mean to do it. But I never thought the day would come when I'd have to hear about that place again. I'll go with you if you want. We just have to lay low and avoid Konoha and its ninja as best we can. Susie nodded as she rested her head back on his shoulder. Yeah, so maybe a car would be the best. We could go to the Ford dealership in town. You know they still got Mustangs from last year. Naruto, he did have the money now. Miss Grimwood had all the stocks, but the money in them blew up. Now, he had almost 100 million, and he'd only taken 20 million out of then set it up for another 10 years. 20 million should be enough for him for 10 years as he rarely spent more than he had to. Naruto nodded and pulled her up with him. Well, let's go look at the cars. You're going to be riding with me, so you're coming with me. Susie smiled, and the two went back into Naruto's room. Naruto helped Susie back down through the window. His door was open as always, a sign he was in the room for any of his sisters in all but BLD to come in to talk. The only times that door closed were when I was changing or talking to one of them. He'd keep it that way after one afternoon. Tannis came banging, crying for help. Naruto's mind drifted back to that day. Flashback third POV. Naruto finished putting his shirt on before hearing bangs from his door and crying. Big bro. Naruto was at his door in a flash, then ripped it off the wall and saw a crying Tannis, her back covered in paint. Naruto threw the door away and kneeled. Tannis. Naruto picked Tannis up and softly felt around her back. He felt bumps, and his anger started to rise as she cried in his arms. Soon, Miss Grimwood came running, Winnie and the other close behind. Naruto held and shushed the crying mummy as she choked out sobs and muttered, "It stings." Once she'd calmed down, Naruto walked down the hall with Miss Grimwood, leading him to the medical office. Naruto handed Tannis over to Miss Grimwood, and she walked in with Sabella and Elsa. Naruto looked down at Winnie, whose ears were down, and she wasn't looking anyone in the eye. A sign Naruto recognized. Young lady. Winnie jumped and looked up at Naruto. What she saw scared her. She saw anger in his BLD red eyes and fangs growing out. You'd better tell what happened right now. Naruto didn't yell and raise his voice, but his tone told her he wanted the truth and nothing but the truth. Oh, I wanted to go outside and stretch my legs. Tannis found me going out and asked to come with me. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked down at her. Young lady, did you ask Miss Grimwood to go outside? Or did you ask one of the older girls to go with you, knowing full well that those much older teenage boys trespass all the time? Winnie hung her head as she spoke. And no, big bro Naruto. I wanted to notice them before they noticed us, since I have such a strong sense of smell and hearing. I just wanted to run around some, and I didn't think either of us would get hurt. Naruto took a deep breath and then let it out. Naruto kneeled and put a hand on Winnie's shoulder. Winnie looked up at Naruto as he gave her a soft smile. Winnie, I understand you, as a werewolf have a much higher energy level and need to move around. But, with many humans so close, you can't just run off. If you want to go out, try and wait for me or matches. If something happens, it's best to have someone who can fight if need be. Winnie nodded, understanding that he was only thinking of their safety. Promise me next time you'll come find me, matches, or tell Miss Grimwood before leaving school building, please. I don't want to see one of my sister harmed again. Winnie nodded again as she spoke. I promise, big bro Naruto. Naruto smiled as he patted her head, and Winnie leaned into his hand as he rubbed her head. Naruto hugged her, and Winnie quickly wrapped her arms around his neck. Naruto stood up, holding her under her knees with his other hand on her back. Soon, Miss Grimwood walked out with cried-out Tanis, who was clinging to her with new bandages wrapped around her. When Tanis saw Naruto, she was reaching for him. Naruto took her with his other arm, with Winnie still holding onto his neck. He took her, and she quickly buried her head into his chest as she held tight to him. Naruto shook the arm Winnie was sitting on. Miss Grimwood took her as Sabella and Elsa walked out, looking upset. So. Miss Grimwood sighed as he spoke. She's going to be bruised up for a while, but no broken skin. Naruto let out a growl as she patted the back of Tanis's head. I'll talk with them once Tanis can take her afternoon nap. All the girls nodded, and the usually quiet and kind Miss Grimwood looked ready to start a war herself. End flashback. Naruto laughed as he remembered storming the school after ripping the steel bar gate off the walls and throwing it a mile away. He dragged Colonel Calloway and his students to the school with his chains. He smirked, remembering their shock as he threw his arms down and crimson chains flew out of his forearms. He still didn't know how he could do that, but did they come in handy. What's so funny? Naruto looked back at Susie and nodded his head. Just think back to the day I put the fear of God into the brats next door. Hurting my like sister. Susie laughed into her hand as she did remember Naruto forcing them onto their hands and knees. Making them beg Tanis for forgiveness before Naruto would let them up to leave. Yeah, word spread after that, and many humans have stopped coming near this place. One young man forced 6 people to their knees and begged for forgiveness. Naruto snorted and nodded from side to side, remembering the mummy's action when he and the other fathers came to the open house. Flashback. 2 weeks had passed since the incident, and Tanis was all but attached to Naruto or Miss Grimwood. But most of the time was with Naruto when he sat in on the classes. But, when the open house came, all the fathers started to come in. They saw how Tanis was acting, and Winnie's father saw the ashamed look on her face when he asked about it. When the mummy came in, Tanis ran to him and jumped onto his legs. When he touched her back, she jerked, and he pulled his hand back. The mummy looked over at Naruto and Miss Grimwood. He saw the set-off look on Naruto's face and the deep frown on Miss Grimwood's face. Naruto walked over and picked Tanis up. The mummy watched as she hugged his neck, so he'd guessed it wasn't Naruto who'd done something. What is going on, Naruto? Naruto sighed and nodded his head before looking at Winnie and her father. Winnie went stiff, and her father saw it. Winnie, you and your father come over here, young lady. I want you to explain what happened. Winnie's ears and head dropped as she answered. Okay, big bro Naruto. Winnie and her now worried-looking father walked over. Winnie explained what had happened, and the 2 fathers were angry. Winnie's father started to explain in a rather loud voice that Naruto was right to reprimand her. She had no business going out without someone to watch over her, especially knowing humans were so close. Then, to take an even younger girl and allow her to get hurt was inexcusable. Winnie whined as her father tore into her. But they all jumped at the mummy's yell. "I'll tear them apart." The mummy turned and started for the door. Naruto quickly handed off Tanis and rushed to stop him. He got in front of him as he was reaching for the door. "Sir, please wait. I've already made them apologize and they promised to stay away." The mummy grabbed Naruto's shoulder and shoved him to the side. When Naruto stumbled, the mummy turned to look at him, his eyes glowing red. "Stay out of my way, Naruto. My anger is not kindled against you." He pulled the door open, and Naruto got behind him. He grabbed him under one and locked his other arm around his neck. Naruto pulled hard, dragging him back. The mummy struggled and pulled on Naruto's arm, trying to free himself. "Sir, please. If a monster of your level and strength goes after them, hunters may learn of this place. While I'm sure I could handle a single hunter if they just stumble on this place. But, they'll come in force if someone like you does something." The other fathers, hearing that, quickly moved over to help restrain the enraged mummy father. They saw reason in Naruto's words. Frankenstein Sr. grabbed the mummy as he seemed to be calming down finally. Count Dracula and the Phantom had closed the door and stood before it while Naruto and the werewolf were ready to jump on him. After another few minutes, the mummy finally calmed down, and they returned to the sitting room. He sat down, and Tanis quickly came over to him. He picked her up and held her close as he spoke up. "I'm sorry everyone, I lost my temper there for a moment." Naruto waved it off as the other all took seats around him. "Please, sir, we understand why you were so mad. If I had a daughter and she was harmed, I'd be on the warpath as well. But, as the guard of this school, I can't risk everyone's safety but allowing you to go and destroy the school." All the fathers nodded at Naruto's words. "But..." They looked at Naruto, who pulled a scroll and unsealed a small list. Naruto cleared his throat with a smirk and held the list out to him. "But... of course, a monster of such skill and power could maybe target the one who actually harmed our little Tanis without directly harming him." The mummy looked at the list and saw addresses. He saw they also had one circled with a red marker. The mummy laughed as he slipped it into his bandages. "I believe you are right, young man." Flashback and Naruto walked down the hall. He and Susie were still holding hands as they walked. His hold was soft, and if Susie wanted, she could pull her hand away, but she didn't. Soon, they were in the sitting room. Naruto let go of Susie, walked over to the old piano, and grabbed his wallet from the top. He checked it and saw his new black debit and credit card. And 2,000 in hundreds and 200 in 20s and 10s. Those old habits never do go away, do they? Naruto looked back and saw Miss Grimwood as she was carrying some papers and what looked like a driver's license. She walked over and held it out to her. "I have all the documents you'll need to buy a car or anything else you may need. You have a driver's license, passport, social security card, and BRTH certificate. Susie, I have a set made for you as well. I know you two may not wish to stay here forever, so best you two have what you need. I won't see any of my young ghouls or the boy I see as my own son have trouble from their land of BRTH." Naruto and Susie smiled, and each hugged her. Miss Grimwood walked with them to the back door and watched as the two walked to the garage. Naruto walked in and pulled out a teleportation platform he'd made by deconstructing Minato's flying thunder god jutsu. He'd placed markers near the town. Naruto walked back out, holding a large, thin slab of stone. He set it down on the ground. Naruto and Susie stepped on it, and Naruto flared his chakra. In a red flash, they were gone, and Miss Grimwood stood there for a moment longer. Watched the spot where the boy she thought of as he own had just stood. She sighed as she put a hand to her face. "I can't wait to see their little ones." With Naruto and Susie appeared just outside of town. Susie quickly put on her bracelet and was covered in a blue mist before taking on her human form. Naruto also regressed to his normal state. When they were done, they looked at each other. They smiled, and Naruto took her hand as they left the tree line. After 20 minutes, they were in front of the Ford dealership. They walked along the line of trucks and Mustangs. Naruto stopped at a 2020 electric purple convertible Mustang GT. Naruto hummed as he let go of Susie and moved his hand around the Mustang. "This is a pretty beast." Naruto ran a hand over the edge of the open top. "Hey, you can't just touch those, son. Now, if your parents are here we can talk about messing with it." Naruto looked back and saw an older man with graying hair. He wore a slightly better-looking button-up, khaki jeans, and black dress shoes. Naruto smiled as he held his hand on the Mustang. "I don't have parents. But, I have the money to buy this beast." The older man raised an eyebrow as he looked at Naruto. "Son, you know cars aren't cheap. Especially a convertible Mustang." Naruto huffed before he pulled his wallet out and pulled out the 2 black cards. The older man's eyes went wide, and his voice changed. "Why, young man, I'm sorry." Naruto huffed as he put the cards away, and they walked to the dealership office. Naruto, holding Susie's hand, walked past him. "Well, sir, sorry to run, but we're going to get someone else to help us." The older man stood there frozen. He'd just lost a big fish and the check that went with it. 1 hour later Naruto and Susie had bought the Mustang and a new 4-door Ford XL150 truck. Naruto had Susie drive the truck down the street into a back alley. Naruto sealed the truck away, and Susie jumped into the passenger seat of Naruto's new primary ride. Naruto had bought the truck mostly to spite the other car salesman. But, he could use it as a work truck for the school or as a weekend ride. "I still can't believe you spent almost $100,000 just to shock him." Naruto laughed as they stopped at a gas station and quickly paid and filled the tank. "I'm petty." Susie laughed as she sat in the passenger seat. Naruto smiled as he got back in and liked seeing Susie in his passenger seat playing on her phone. Naruto smiled as he had been the one who bought the phone for her. He reached over and patted her shoulder, and Susie smiled as she looked back at him. Naruto decided he liked having her in that seat as they returned to the school. 2 weeks later Naruto hummed as he washed his Mustang. He also watched the girls play annual volleyball games with the academy boys. Susie was acting referee and had already called them the cadets 3 times. Once for a jetpack, a controller, and the DMN colonel trying to say the field was unfit. The fool had it out for the school and himself after he had them begging on their knees. But, soon, the girls scored the winning point, and he smiled as he watched his hand take the trophy. He smiled as he leaned on the trunk and he watched Tanis hop around screaming her mommy Case finally had a trophy. When he was about to move to congratulate them, a rush of memories came. Naruto frowned before he jumped after making a shadow clone and sent it towards the girls. At the front of the school Naruto appeared in a tree, looking down at a strange monster. The monster had one large eye with a red pupil. His body looked like a pickle, and his arms and legs were vine-like. He seemed to be planting something. "Want to tell me what you're doing?" The monster jumped and looked up into the trees. Naruto saw it moving back as he jumped down to the ground. Naruto narrowed his eyes as his more feral treats were scaring the monster. Who are you?" Naruto raised an eyebrow as he heard the male voice. "Naruto Uzumaki, one of the defenders of Miss Grimwood's school. It's my job to tear anyone or anything apart if they wish to harm or spy on the school." The male monster gulped as he looked at Naruto. I was just looking for food." Naruto snorted before he flexed his hands. "Don't lie to me again." The monster turned and tried to run. But, in the blink of an eye, Naruto was on top of him and slammed him to the ground. Naruto and the monster struggled for a few seconds before Naruto had the monster on his chains. Naruto still didn't know how or why the chains worked. But, it seemed that they sealed off the powers of anyone they restrained. While Naruto dragged the strange monster to the school, Miss Grimwood walked around the building. She stopped when she saw Naruto dragging the yelling monster, who was crying for someone called Revolta. "Naruto, what happened?" Miss Grimwood asked as she rushed up to him. Naruto yanked the monster as he struggled to get away. "I found this guy planting something and I have clones searching the swamp and the grounds." He was also calling out to someone called Revolta. Miss Grimwood's eyes narrowed after she heard that name. The Witch of the Web. A nasty woman even among monsters she disliked. She's the type to want world domination. It got her thrown from the Witch Covenant. Naruto nodded and then looked back at the monster. "Is this guy real or artificial?" Miss Grimwood walked up to the monster and looked him over. He's an artificial grim creeper. A plant monster who's made from being grown in graveyard soil and swamp water, that was all Naruto needed to hear. Naruto made a fist, and the chains quickly destroyed the energy in his body. The grim creeper screamed before he turned into a pile of soil and dead plants. Naruto didn't feel guilty as the creeper was never truly alive. While Naruto still didn't wish to kill anyone, he had been forced to accept that sometimes you had to kill. He would not look for fights to the death. But he'd also try his best not to go that far. Naruto. Naruto looked down at Miss Grimwood as she touched his forearm. He looked down at her, and he smiled at her. "It's fine, Miss Grimwood." "I know, but he wasn't truly alive." She nodded and understood. He leaned down and gave her a quick hug before he pulled back. Miss Grimwood watched as Naruto headed for the school. She sighed as he walked inside the front door. "Oh, my poor boy. Why must such a kind soul be born with the talents of a grandmaster?" 2 days later Naruto smiled as he watched the girls celebrate with their parents. At his side was Susie, her head resting on his shoulder as they sat on the couch. Arm wrapped around her shoulder, and Naruto had a smile on his face. Susie laughed before she spoke up. "Hard to believe that we're going to be leaving this place in a few days." Naruto nodded as he watched Tanis show off the trophy. Then memories hit him, and his smile turned into a smirk. His clones had found Revolta, and her lair was gone. Revolta was on the run. The clones had found her plans to control the girls and use them to take over the monster world. Big bro Naruto. Naruto snapped back and saw Tanis and Winnie rushing to him with a large box. The box had old carvings and seal tails covering the top. The other two were coming over holding boxes, and Frankentine had a large box in hand. Naruto pulled his arm from around Susie and moved to sit up. "Ya girls." They smiled as they stopped in front of them. "We all told our dads about what you guys would do, and they all pulled stuff from our family armories. We have stuff for you to guess to use if you have to fight. You're free to keep them, as they're protecting the school." They held the large box to him, and he took it from them. "This one is from both mine and Tanis's family." The box was long enough for Susie to fit in, with a little room to spare. Naruto opened it and stopped as he saw an Egyptian pole axe. It was fully made of bronze with a polished body with a black axe blade that looked like it was made of smooth-cut obsidian. The second weapon appeared to be nothing more than a battered katana with a heavily chipped and rusted blade with the hilt's fabric tearing away. A black sheath was next to it with a red rope tied around it. Naruto reached down and grabbed the sword, and he felt a pulse before it erupted in yellow energy. Everyone covered their eyes, and when they looked back, they saw a new sword in Naruto's hand. The blade turns into a great sword that resembles an oversized dog's fang, fitting for the monster he'd gotten it from. The cross guard turned into a large patch of fur similar to a dog or wolf. "Is that the Tessega?" Naruto looked up at a shocked Miss Grimwood and examined the sword up and down. He nodded, deciding to get everything she had on the Tessega later. He grabbed the sheath and then pushed the sword in. As he did, the sword gave off a yellow light. Once sheathed, he put the sword back and closed the box before Sabella walked up to Susie. "Here you go, Susie. My mother made this 100 years before a hunter slew her. It's a battle dress. It's made from giant black widow silk and has defensive magic weaved in. Her box looked like a dress box. Susie opened the black box and looked at the dress. She stood as she pulled the dress out. It looked nice with open sides and with a slightly open top. Come on, let's go and get you into this dress. Sibella and Fanti quickly got her up and pulled her away to the rooms, with Elsa following. Naruto nodded, and then the phantom floated over and pulled out a set of black forearm guards with red and blue inlays along the edges. These are made from energy-eating ghost metal. It will block both the elemental and physical attacks the shinobi use. Once it's eaten, it's filled with energy from enemies. You'll be able to launch a devastating shockwave attack. Then Frankenstein walked up and dropped the box on his lap. Naruto blinked as he felt the weight. He opened it and saw a shield. It looked made of black steel with a tiger's head on the front. This is a shield made by a monster blacksmith. It's made with a mix of steel and mithril, making the shield impenetrable. It also can deflect nearly all attacks except for attacks that can destroy whole mountains. Naruto nodded and set it aside as he stood up. He then bowed to them all and spoke. Thank you all for the aid you've given me. I promise these items will be used to protect everyone, and I'll protect everyone even if it costs my life. When he stood back up, he saw everyone smiling at him. After a few minutes, Naruto had sealed everything before Sibella came around the corner. Oh Naruto. Naruto looked over, and so did everyone else. Naruto froze with his jaw hanging when Susie walked out from behind her. Susie stood there in the dress, showing off the softer-looking scales. She wore black arm gloves with rings on her middle fingers with fabrics covering to tops of her hands. On her neck was a lace necklace with a black rose. She had on some black and gold eyeshadows with black lipstick on. Her hair was up in a bun, and the slits along her hip were open, showing off her hips, legs, and feet with a pair of battle heels. The dress seemed made for her as it hugged her body just right. Susie was blushing but smiled when she saw Naruto's face. Everyone looked between the two, and the young girls laughed into their hands. Before they knew it, hands started to play the father-daughter dance song. One Naruto had picked out. My Wish by Rascal Flatts is a song Naruto knew Susie loved. Oh my, the last dance. Naruto closed his mouth as the count spoke. He looked at him and saw a smirk on his face. Naruto, be a proper gentleman and offer to dance with the only free student here. Naruto blushed as he looked back at Susie and saw her playing with her hands. She was looking at the ground, and Naruto gulped as he quickly fixed his vest and hair he'd pulled into a ponytail. Then he fixed his tie as he walked over with a back straight and one arm behind his back. He held a hand out to her as he slightly bowed. My good lady, may I have the honor of this last dance? Susie smiled as she took his hand. He led her to the dance floor, the others following. They all started a slow dance, and Naruto softly held Susie, letting her set the pace. After a minute, Susie smiled as she wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck and rested her forearms on his shoulders. As the song went on, Naruto smiled as he looked into the golden eyes he loved to look at. Naruto smiled as his hands moved from her middle arm down to near her waist but still away from her hips, and his grip still soft so she could pull away if she wanted to. Susie didn't seem to care and smiled a little more as she moved closer. Naruto smiled as he wrapped his arms around her lower back and felt Susie's small tail rubbing against the edge of his hand. How many times have we been dance partners? Naruto laughed as they slowly moved away from the others as they danced. Nearly every class since most of time you got the real me, not a clone. But, I've never thought I'd see you like this. All dolled up and looked like a proper lady, not the pretty tomboy I see every day. Susie laughed as she rested her chin on his chest and smiled at her. Oh. And which do you like better? Naruto smiled as he held her a little tighter. I've never cared about all the prim and proper look. I like the tomboy who looks like she'd kick my butt if I overstepped. Susie laughed more before they noticed the song had finished. They looked around and saw everyone looking at them. They quickly broke apart, and everyone smiled. Sibella laughed before she spoke up. You two know the dawn is still a few hours away. Why don't you two go and have some fun in the swamp? It's a full moon and a few hours of the silence of the night. Naruto laughed and looked at Susie. If they want us to do the time, may as well do the crime. Susie and everyone else laughed at his bad joke, and Susie's grabbed his hand. Come on, you stupid fox. Naruto smirked as she pulled him to the door. He was pulling his phone out and looking for romantic songs. Susie took him to the open drawbridge, and Naruto started playing another song Susie liked, and one he opened would set the mood. After a few seconds, a sad song by Elena Coates started to play. Naruto quickly held his hands just above her waist again, but Susie, this time, had her hand on his shoulders. They slowly moved from side to side, and Naruto smiled as Susie looked up at him. Susie wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck and looked at him as the song ended. Fox. Naruto laughed as he moved a hand to her face and cupped her right cheek. Naruto rubbed his thumb on her cheek. Susie saw Naruto's eyes were full of love, and Naruto Susie was full of hope and care. Do you think this fox can try something without getting smacked? Knowing what he was getting at, Susie grabbed his tie and pulled him down into a soft kiss. Naruto softly held her as she pulled back, and they looked at each other. As she pulled away, a flash blinded them. Naruto quickly had her behind him, with a tactical knife in hand. But he stopped when he saw Miss Grimwood and the girls looking at them. Naruto growled, and they all laughed before turning and running. Watch out, the fox is coming for us. Fanty yelled, and Naruto growled before he went to go after them. You all had to come now of all times. Winnie and Tanis laughed as they rushed back to the school. Susie laughed into her hand, nodded, and crossed her arms as she watched them all run. I love that boy. Susie grabbed his phone and started to head back to the school. 3 days later Naruto put the last of Susie's bags into the truck's back seats. He closed the door, looked over at the school, and saw Susie as she hugged Miss Grimwood. He could hear them as they talked. Well, be back before the next year starts. Will some be back safe and sound? Naruto laughed as he jogged up to the steps as Miss Grimwood walked down a few steps. Naruto hugged her before he stood back up. I'll bring her home safe and sound. And maybe beat the hell out of that father of hers. Miss Grimwood laughed a little as she covered her mouth. Oh my boy. Do try and not get into too much trouble. Naruto nodded and jogged back to the truck. He jumped into the driver's seat and closed the door. Susie grabbed his hand as he reversed the truck. Naruto, can we talk about us? Naruto looked at her before I nodded. Yeah, just let me get us going. Susie nodded and moved her hand. Naruto got backed up and turned around. He started to drive down the dirt road and spoke. So, what do you want to do? Susie rubbed a hand on his forearm, and she was looking out the window. We kissed and we haven't talked about it. Naruto blushes as he has been trying not to talk about it. I know, I just wasn't sure when would be best to talk about it. I mean Susie, I care about you and I don't know how to really word it. When I look at you I see a soul who'd seen and felt what I had. We'd loved life so similar that I feel that maybe we could be something but. I'm also scared that if I tried something then you may push me away. Susie nodded, understanding where Naruto was coming from. I understand that Naruto. We've both been hurt in the past and we both have had walla up for a long time. Naruto laughed a little as they turned into the main road. Yeah, and we've made good friends while trying to take those walls down. But, if you're willing, I'd love to have you as my girlfriend. Susie smiled and nodded as she grabbed his free hand. I'd like to try having a healthy form of love. Naruto smiled as he held her hand as he drove. And they laughed as they drove down the road to a fated reunion. In the Elemental Nations 8 years ago, flashback, Naruto had been gone for a month, and Minato had launched a full-scale investigation. What they had found nearly made him, Kushina, Tsunade, and Jiraiya go on a rampage. Other civilians and shinobis had attacked Naruto. Minato growled as he recalled finally looking at his son's hospital records. To his horror, his son's records filled a room with filing cabinets. After that, Minato called a village meeting and tore the villagers and shinobis a new one. A few times to explain that Naruto was the Nine Tails reincarnated. And when Minato demanded a reason, all they could come up with was his whiskers. Minato tore that reason apart by telling them those were his birthmarks. He then explained how the seals he'd used all on his sons, and the people were beginning to understand. That understanding quickly turned into horror as they realized what they had been doing. "Oh, Kami. What have we done?" Minato watched as the village started to understand what they'd done. Soon he ended the meeting and went to deal with his other two sons. He'd found that Naruto had been blamed for everything Menma and Zuko had done. All the pranks, fights, and stealing had been his other sons. He used his prize jutsu and appeared in front of his house. He could already feel the headache of what was about to happen. Minato walked up to the door and opened it to find Kushina going over maps of Fire Country with Tsunade and Jiraiya. On the maps were red marks. Next to them were a list of names of towns and cities around the Fire Country. "Have the toads found anything?" Jiraiya nodded as he crossed out another town. "No, any MA and PA are still set at us. They've also been talking to the slugs, and now Katsuyu is refusing to be summoned." Tsunade frowned as she made 2 more towns to look into. "Plus, Sensei and most of the village's best ninja, ANBU, and the whole Uchiha are all but violent with us." Kushina sighed and nodded her head as she wrote down a new list. "Yeah, and now parents are keeping their kids away from Menma and Zoku. Now that everyone knows that Menma and Zuko had been doing and blaming Naruto for. They've isolated them, and the clan heads have become distant and unwelcoming to us." Minato sighed as he sat down beside Kushina and rubbed his face. "How did we not see any of this?" Tsunade and Jiraiya didn't know what to say, but Kushina did. "We were thinking about that stupid pervert's prophecy. Like you kept saying, we had to ready them for the 2 boys you 2 idiots believed would save the ninja world. Which has cost us our firstborn and nearly our place in the village." They all stayed quiet as they looked at her as she finished writing. She stood, and Minato finally saw she was in her Jonin gear. Minato knew she was going off again. He sighed as he looked at her as she headed for the door. Minato stood up and started for the kitchen. His sons wouldn't be home for a few more hours, so he had time to plan their punishments. Scooby-Doo plus Naruto crossover. Elemental Nations 8 years ago. Flashback. Minato sighed as he watched Menma and Zuko run laps and nodded his head. His sons had not understood what they had done wrong and still didn't. Minato had torn them a new one. Just a few hours ago, flashback. Mianto sat in the dining room. Soon, his sons came in, and they saw him waiting. They recognized this as something that would always happen when they blamed Naruto for something. Menma glued, and his blonde spiked head went on end. Zuko ran his hands over his red and blonde hair. "Dad. What's up?" Minato narrowed his eyes as he looked at Zuko as he spoke. "You two get over here now." Minato didn't yell or raise his voice, but his tone made it clear they had no choice. They slowly walked over, scared as they looked at their father. This wasn't the father they knew. They knew a father who showered them with love and promised they'd be the strongest ninjas in the world. They sat across from him, and they could see his anger, no fury, on his face. They sat there, uncomfortable with the way he looked at them. "You two. I want answers right now. Why have you two lied to us about Naruto for so long?" Menma and Zuko looked at him pale. Zuko tried to think of something to say, but Menma blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "The loser. Who cares? One of us is going to be the child of prophecy. He." Shoulda be happy he got any attention since he doesn't matter. Why should we care if it was bad attention? Minato slammed his fist on the table, his ki flaring up as he looked at Menma. Then he looked at Zuko and saw his eyes. They were filled with both fear and anger. Minato stood as he spoke. I'm saying this once and you two had better listen. Your training in our clan arts ends today. I will place seals on you two so you can't call on your chakra or the 9 tails until I see fit to remove it. You will be clan shinobi once you come of age. Thus you will have no rank, take no missions and will only have the skills to defend this house and village. Until Naruto, mine and your mother's true heir has returned you will only learn what non-clan children will learn. Zuko and Menma looked at Minato in shock and horror. They knew that being declared a clan shinobi meant one of two things. Either they were seen as a high-flight risk or unfit to serve the village. Dad, you can't be serious. Menma yelled as he slammed his hands down on the table. Zuko sat there, shocked, looking at his father. Minato turned and started to walk away. I have spoken. You two are to run laps until I say otherwise. The two knew this wasn't up for debate. They just got up and moved to the back door to start the laps. Back with Minato 8 years ago. Minato sighed as he turned from the window and rubbed his face. He couldn't believe what he'd heard a few hours ago, and he was glad Kushina was home. If she'd heard them talking, he feared they would have suffered a fate worse than death. He walked over to his desk, sat in the chair, and looked at the emptied library and safe. Minato and Kushina had learned from Hiruzen that Naruto was a natural with seals. He cracked his level 7 safe seal and then created a genjutsu seal to hide the safe that had been opened along with all the scrolls. Minato and Kushina were shocked when they learned their oldest had the skill and ability to do it all. They'd thought that Naruto didn't care about all of it after the prophecy and him not willing to take life. He was a quiet and peaceful child, from what they knew. But, no. He was a prodigy among prodigies, and they couldn't see it. All because Naruto didn't want to fight and kill for the village. How? Minato grabbed the sheet of paper that had shocked him the most in his life. He looked down at the skills list his now former student had given him before denouncing him. In a year, Naruto had reached Chunin levels in all areas. All thanks to his talent and how he figured out the secret of the shadow clones in under an hour on his own. After 6 months, he was a level 6 seal MSTR who could, with time, crack a level 7 seal. But, what shocked him was that all the skills Naruto had learned were non-lethal jutsu and non-lethal taijutsu styles. When Minato had tried to ask the teachers Naruto had picked, they refused to answer him. Claiming that Naruto was a civilian and they were teaching him in their free time, Minato couldn't force them to talk. He sighed as he set the sheet down. Why didn't I see all this? Minato set the sheet down before he felt 2 flares of chakra, then a second passed before 3 more flares. Minato recognized the signal, which flared his chakra. A second later, Weasel appeared before him, one of the few ANBU who could enter his house. Ida. Weasel, Lord Hokage. Itachi quickly cut off Minato as he, too, was still said with Minato. He may have finally found a lead on his second little brother, but they could do anything with it. He pulled out a scroll and set it on the desk before he vanished. Weasel. Minato called out, but he knew Itachi was already gone. Minato sighed as he looked down at the scroll that he'd left. He sighed again, deeper this time, and grabbed the scroll. He opened it and started to read. After a few minutes, Minato dropped the scroll, his eyes wide as he looked at the scroll on the floor. The same amount that was taken had been exchanged for American cash, and America was a place where they couldn't go to follow him. The elemental nation's ninja villages were hidden, so they couldn't risk sending anyone there to look for him. Deciding that he couldn't hide this flared his chakra. 3 ANBU appeared, and Minato returned the scroll like Itachi had it. Take this to my wife. She's at the hospital again. Minato spoke with a bitter tone. After she ran out of towns, villages, and small cities in the fire country to search, she started tearing the village apart. She was either trying to find missing clues or reading the mountains of medical files on Naruto at the hospital. Minato knew that once his wife and teacher learned of this, all hell would break loose. After 20 minutes, his office door was thrown open as Kushina rushed in with the scroll in hand. Minato. What teams are we sending? Minato sighed as she rushed in with Tsunade and Jiraiya. Knowing what was about to happen, Minato looked at the desk and leaned back into his chair. We can't go after Naruto for 2 reasons, Kushina. What? I want my son back now. Minato didn't look at his wife as he spoke. The first Hokage and the daimyo ordered that lands outside the elemental nations can never learn of the shinobi. So, we can't send any ninja after Naruto. Plus, America is nearly 1,000 times the size of the nations. We do not know the people, their way of life or their culture. They could react violently if their views are too different regarding what we did. Second, we have no idea when the next ship is coming. Trade is sporadic and we never know which port they're stopping at. Our own ships can't make the ocean crossing. Everyone looked at him as he kept looking at the desk. Well, it seems our only option is to wait for now. I guess it's best if we keep focusing on Zuko and Menma. Everyone looked at Jiraiya, and Minato narrowed his eyes. No, we're not. They will be clan shinobi and not village ninja. Everyone looked at Minato and saw his hardened gaze. It was clear he wanted no arguments. But Jiraiya was worried about the prophecy. But, Minato, the prophecy. Minato slammed his fist on the desk and glared at his sensei. Is no longer cared about in this house and village. It cost me and Kushina our firstborn and this will be the last time I'll hear of it. Everyone looked at him and saw he was in no mood to argue. They all just accepted that this was how it was going to be. Kushina, for her part, walked out of the room with tears in her eyes as she looked down at the scroll. She knew where her son had gone but couldn't go after him. She stopped at a window and saw her other sons still running. But, all she felt when she looked at them was annoyance and slight anger. She'd been told the truth, and she felt the love for them dying. Those two. Kushina turned away from them, feeling sick, as she looked at the 2 monsters she'd helped create. As she walked away, she looked back down at the scroll. Silently wishing for her son to return. Konoha current day. Over the last 8 years, Menma and Zuko have lived a life similar to Naruto's. However, they didn't experience hunger like Naruto and never learned of Naruto's pain. However, they did learn of their parents' isolation and slight neglect. Their mother and father only gave them minimal attention outside of brutal training they'd never expected. They walked away, beaten. But they refused to change. They still believe one of them would be the chosen child. But they were also trapped. Minato had made good on his words, and they were clan shinobi and knew only what an average ninja. But, to the family's and village's horror, it was found out that Menma and Zuko were both sterile. They had to be tested after a woman from the red light district came and claimed the baby she was carrying was Menma's at 16. They'd had the DNA tested and found it wasn't his, and they tested Menma for any STDs. He was clear, but they found he couldn't have kids. Zuko was then checked, and found they were both sterile. Tsunade had run a few more tests and found the 9-tailed chakra was the cause. Tsunade believed that Naruto, having the soul, might be the only viable child. Minato and Kushina weren't shocked, and Tsunade, Jiraiya, and the other villagers were shocked they didn't care. Kushina snapped when pushed, saying it was good their family wouldn't continue through them. They were cruel and unfit ever to have a child. They still believed they were right to act as they had and still do. They believed Naruto was worthless and that DMN prophecy of the toads. With Naruto and Susie 1 week ago, Naruto smiles as he and 3 transformed clones carry Susie's bags. Naruto had sealed the truck in a scroll and sheathed it on his side. He'd had scroll sheaths made by one of Winnie's pack mates who worked with leather. They were pure horse leather with the kanji for ghouls on the fronts with red leather. He had one each for his Mustang and truck, with another 2 holding weeks' worth of food and weapons. The last was a large scold strapped to his lower back. It has spare ties, parts, tools, and dozens of barrels of gas and oil. Soon, they were on the way, and all the monsters returned to their true forms. Susie took her bracelet off, and Naruto returned to his feral form. Susie. Naruto looked up and watched as an older woman came running. She was similar to Susie, but her hair was white. She wore a purple dress, and her scales were a darker purple. She wrapped her arms around her neck. Susie laughed and hugged her back. Auntie Kiki. Naruto smiles as he recognizes the name. This was the family member she was living with outside of school. Naruto had heard stories about her and knew this woman was someone he could trust with worry. It was shocking to know this was her ship as well. Naruto asked why they couldn't sail into the land of rivers. He was told they had no deep water ports for larger ships. So, they paid to have private ports in the land of fire. When Kiki saw Naruto was uncomfortable when the land of fire came up, she asked. Susie took her to the side and then gave her a quick explanation. After 20 minutes, Kiki had grabbed Naruto and pulled him into a bone-crushing hug. Once she finally let him go, she rushed to get the message out. Naruto groaned as he knew the other would catch wind of this. Sorry about my Aunt Kiki. Naruto looked at Susie as she rubbed the back of her head. He laughed as he nodded his head. It's fine, just wasn't ready for the sudden hug. But, we need to worry about Sabella, Winnie, and the others. When they hear you, Aunt, Susie nodded but hadn't told him she'd heard Sabella's and Winnie's fathers sending warriors ahead of them. She knew Naruto didn't want to risk them, but they'd send 2 of their strongest fighters. After an hour, Kiki had returned and had a shocked look on her face. You 2 won't believe who's in the elemental nations. Alucard the anti-Dracula, who is a cousin of Princess Sabella. Plus, Free. A werewolf who lived for over 200 years and had stolen an evil witch's eye to steal her magic. He was one of Werewolf's Alpha Pack's elite warriors. 2 of the strongest fighters in the monster world besides their own leaders. Naruto's eyes were wide as he looked at her. Naruto had heard of these 2, and he grew a little excited. He'd heard a lot about these 2. They were powerhouses who'd long ago made their names well known. Then his eyes narrowed as he looked away, crossed his arms, and moved a hand to his chin. This 2 monsters. What is going on there? They're known for fighting hunters out in the open. Why would they be so far from their territories? Susie wanted to tell him what she'd overheard but knew it wouldn't be smart. Naruto would try and send them away knowing it would be a risk to them. So she decided to stay quiet about it. Naruto decided he would get an answer when they met up with them. Kiki, seeing the 2 looking uncomfortable, spoke up, hoping to get the young couple back to normal. Well, let's forget about that for now. You 2 have free run of the ship and you each have a private room. Naruto, yours is over on the right of the ship with the fighters, and Susie, your room is next to mine. Naruto and Susie nodded as they stood. Naruto cracked his back as Susie looked around the community room. There were 2 small movie projectors, a TV with a bookshelf of DVDs and CDs, games lined the shelves, and a wall of books. She got up and looked at the list next to one of the movie projectors. There were 4 names already written and she looked at the other one. There were 5 on that one. Susie decided she wanted a small movie date with her boyfriend. She put her name down on the list with 4 names and then looked at the TV. The list was empty, and she smiled as she quickly wrote her name down and looked back at Naruto. Naruto. The TV is ours. So do you have anything you want to watch? Naruto hummed and shrugged. I never really got into TV, so you can pick, I'm sure it will be good. Susie nodded and started going through the DVDs. After a few minutes, she walked over with a larger case containing a title he could see, Law and Order, Seasons 1 to 3. She opened the case and put the Season 1 dice in. She grabbed the remote and then walked back over to the couch. She sat down and snuggled into Naruto's side. I promise you're going to love this show. Naruto smiled as he wrapped an arm around her as the intro started. The two spent the whole ship ride getting closer. They spent all the time they could together, and at times, Naruto sparred with some of the monsters who liked to practice martial arts. Naruto had quickly proved he was a force to fear. He could fight off anyone who tried fighting with him. Some had more than 2 arms and legs or used teeth and tails. Naruto had beaten everyone who tried. When not fighting, he watched TV with Susie or made space for them to dance. Naruto had also listened to Susie's aunt and decided to write letters for those he left behind. He didn't want to return, but they deserved some kind of closure. Naruto also made it a point to make some of the things she loves to eat. Susie would admit she loved the attention Naruto gave her. Susie was a little clingy after all the attention he showed to her. Naruto didn't mind, happy to have her at his side. But after 2 weeks, they landed in the land of fire. They'd all taken their human form, and Naruto unsealed his truck once they were out of sight. Naruto exchanged his cash and got 200,000 ryo. When they walked back out to meet back up with Kiki, they heard someone yell. "Hey!" Susie saw her aunt coming over while Naruto was sealing up her stuff. She saw Alucard and Free walking up to them. Alucard was a handsome son with light pale skin with long blonde hair. He was dressed in a long black cloak with a V-neck and black jeans and had a fancy 2-handed sword. On his back was a shield with a red cross on the front. In his human form, he is a tall, attractive man with a muscular build. Apparently seeming to be in his 30s, with some facial hair unkempt. On his right shoulder, he has a tattoo of unknown form, which resembles an eye. His left eye is removed and replaced with Maba's own demon eye. Above this demon eye is not an eyebrow but a tattoo of the words, without spaces, no future. This eye also shows no pupil or iris, it has a magical array. Despite his escape from the witch prison, Free still almost always wears his prison clothes with an eye patch to hide his stolen eye. "Are you two Alucard and Free?" Naruto stood and looked at the two men as they nodded. "Yeah, we're going to be guarding you two while in the elemental nations." Free spoke a little rough, but his tone carried a hint of mischief. Naruto smiled and reached out to them. "I'm Naruto, and this is my girlfriend Susie. It's a pleasure to meet you both." Alucard took his hand and shook it. "The pleasure is ours, Sir Naruto. You've watched out for our princesses for years without having been asked. That's why we're here." Naruto let out a small laugh knowing why they were here now. "Oh. I'll have to have a chat with them when I get back. I'll need to thank them for the help." Alucard and Free knew that look. Their princesses had done something they were told not to, and they knew Naruto would give them a real earful later. Naruto sighed and looked around before reaching for his neck and grabbing the glamour face mask Miss Grimwood had made years ago. He pulled it up and covered his face, which glowed a dark blue before it vanished. His face changed from the magic face mask. His whisker marks were gone, and a scar now ran over the left side of his face. His face, which normally looked like his father's, now looked more like his mother's. His eye had turned the royal purple of the Uzumaki thanks to the spell-taking traits from his DNA. Naruto looked into the window and saw he still liked himself, but looked just different enough. He may still be recognized, but it would be much harder unless someone called his name. I should have guessed the quality of Miss Grimwood's face mask spell wasn't in question. But, what the is going on with my eyes? They all looked at his eyes, and none had an answer. Naruto turned and looked at Susie and her aunt. Question better save for later, I guess. Now, Miss Kiki, are you sure you don't want to ride back to the land of rivers? Kiki smiled and nodded her head. Thanks, my boy, but no. I had business in the fire capital. My truck would be much faster. Kiki smiled and nodded her head. My men have taken down ANBU level shinobi before, so I'll be fine. When you two are done you can wait at my house. Susie knows how to get there. A slight smile crossed her face as she looked at Naruto. But, I don't want to be a great aunt yet, so you two better be safe. Naruto and Susie turned red as Free busted out and laughed, with Alucard smirking. Auntie. Naruto's mind wandered to Susie lying on a bed in a black lacy panties, and fishnet stockings. He got redder, and Free laughed harder. Oh my god, look at him. You got him thinking about it now. Haha. Naruto growled and glared at Free. Keep laughing and see what I do to you, DMN dog. Free stopped laughing and growled as he got in Naruto's face. I'm a wolf, you half-breed. They both growled at each other, their fangs growing, and Alucard stepped between them before they could start to fight. Okay, stop. Free, he was right to snap at you, and Naruto, please don't start a fight near a human settlement. Susie quickly walked over and pulled Naruto back as he and Free growled at one another. Alucard spoke again as he moved to the truck. You two better stay away from each other for now. Naruto snorted before he nodded to the truck. You guys can either sit in the bed or the back seats. I know we'll have to get close to Konoha, so I'll have a clone run the scroll with the letters to the gate. Susie nodded as she got into the passenger seat. Alucard got behind Naruto while Free jumped into the bed as he was a little too big for the back seat. Naruto started up the truck and started to drive. Susie decided much would be good, opened the glove box and pulled out a small collection of CDs. They could use Bluetooth, but without the internet in the nation, they could only play downloads. Susie put in a CD with the best hits of the 90s. The first song to start was Friends in Low Places. As the song played, Alucard spoke up as he opened the back window. Free leaned close to the window to listen in. So, what should we expect if we get into a fight? Naruto hummed as he paused the song. Konoha when I was still a child was well known for specialist teams and teamwork. Heavy assault teams, tracking teams, defense teams and ANBU squads. The UMBU squads are a mix of the best of the teams and trained into the ground day in day out. It will be an uphill battle if we get surrounded. We also need to watch out for 7 shinobi especially. Might Guy, Kakashi, Enko, Itachi, Tsunade, Jiraiya and Minato the 4th Hokage. Those 7 are people I knew were still active combative unit leaders. They're all much stronger than the average ninja or UMBU. Alucard and Free nodded as they should be able to handle the teams. Naruto knew the faces of the ones they needed to worry about, so they just have to be careful. But, Naruto knew that his Jiji, Kurenai, Mikoto, and the Uchiha clans were powerful, but Jiji was too old to fight on the front lines. His big sis Kurenai was a stealth and genjutsu MSTR, and his auntie Mikoto had been retired for years, so she wouldn't be as powerful but still a threat. Then there was the Uchiha clan as a whole. If they all came at them at once, he'd have to go all out to stop them. Hey Naruto, why are you sending a clone to the village? With Miss Grimwood glamour mask you could walk in yourself. Naruto nodded as he watched the road. No, even if it's been a few years, ninjas can sense and remember certain chakra signatures. My clone's signature would be weaker than mine, so it could deliver the letters without too much trouble. I see, so that's why you don't want to risk getting closer than you have to. Naruto looked at Free in the review mirror. Yeah, but I'm sure one of the people I maintained will figure out it's a clone and released I'm back. We need to be near or over the border before that happens. Free looked at him confused. How is the border going to stop them from coming after us? Naruto smiled as he remembered his Jiji's lessons from years ago. Shinobi International Law. It states that ninjas aren't allowed in a nurture country without either a mission in that country or permission of the royal family. We're untouchable if we can get over it before they catch up. The problem is waiting for the ninja on our return trip. Free and Alucard nodded while Susie looked at her Naruto. We can wait a month at the longest, Naruto. What happens if we have to fight our way back to the port? Naruto sighed as he turned onto one of the 3 main roads of the trade roads. I know, but with the truck and my Mustang we'll be at the border in 2 days at most if we drive non-stop. We'll stop for food and a place to sleep an hour or 2 before dark. How long until we get close to this Konoha place? Naruto hummed as he remembered it. Naruto huffed as he thought about it. By horse-drawn cart a few hours to a day. But at this pace maybe 2 hours at most. Everyone understood that Naruto had made his mind up about this. So they all sat back and decided. Just to enjoy the ride. Susie started the music back up before she leaned back in her seat. She smiled as she couldn't wait for the beat-down Naruto would give her father and brother. In Konoha, 3 hours later the Eternal Gate guards, Izumo and Kotetsu, were watching the cloud board out of the corner of their minds. But Izumo looked down from the clouds and saw the new post out of the corner of his eyes. He didn't want to, but he looked at the boy the village had driven away. There on the wall was the image of their lost prince, Naruto. The post was a drawing of what they believed Naruto would look like now, given his parents' features. Izumo looked at the boy and wished he'd done things differently. He'd seen how Naruto suffered but had decided it was best to leave it alone at the time. But, he regretted it after everyone learned how the boy suffered. Izumo sighed as he looked away from the poster and saw someone walking down the dirt road. "Hey, Kotetsu." Kotetsu hummed before he looked down the road and saw a man walking down the road. He was tall, but what caught their attention was his long red hair almost the same as Kushina's. On his shoulder was a long black coat on his shoulder that flapped in the air. His hands were in his pockets, and he wore black briefs, combat boots, and a white shirt. They looked at his face and saw that he had a wild-looking face with a scar running across his face. His eyes were a deep green, and then they looked him over again. They noticed a scroll strapped to his right thigh. Once he was close to them, he spoke in a gruff voice. "I'm here to deliver some letters from a certain someone." Izumo and Kotetsu looked at him, both getting ready to fight. "And who would that certain someone be?" Izumo asked as he held a hidden kunai. "He didn't give me his name but paid well. He told me if I was stopped to give you this old nickname. Demon Fox." Izumo and Kotetsu froze when they heard him say those words. The man then took out the scroll as he stopped guard's desk. "Now, I was paid to deliver the scroll holding the letters to a." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Ah, yes. A Miss Mikoto Uchiha." Izumo and Kotetsu looked at each other, knowing Mikoto claimed Naruto should have listened to her. She'd gone to petition the daimyo for Naruto custody if he was found. Minato and Kushina had tried to fight it, but once Mikoto showed evidence of Naruto's life and medical records. He saw Naruto wouldn't be safe and granted her Naruto's custody if he was found before his 18th birthday. But, if he was found or returned after he was 18, he was not obligated to stay in Konoha or the Land of Fire. His former family was also to stay away unless Naruto offered first contact. Kushina had locked herself in the house for a month and Minato had thrown himself into his work, not wanting to think of anything else. The two snapped back to reality and looked up at the man. "Can I go in? I was told to hand-deliver this scroll to her." The two looked at each other one last time then nodded. "Yes, the Uchiha district is 20 minutes from the gate. Its symbol is a fan with a red top and white body. Take this pass with you to enter the district." Izumo threw a wooden block to the clone. He caught it as he started to walk. "Thanks." They watched the man as he walked into the village. "Kotetsu, go to the Hokage as fast as you can. I'm going to get an ANBU to tail him." Nodding, Kotetsu vanished in a burst of speed. Izumo had flared his chakra twice and a weasel appeared. "What's going on, Izumo?" "A man who'd had contact with Naruto is taking a scroll with letters to your mother. He's heading to the Uchiha district, he has hair like Kushin, and is wearing a black coat on his shoulder. Tail him." Itachi vanished a second later. This was the first news of his second little brother in years, and if he had the chance, he would have gotten information from this man. With the Naruto clone, the clone walked down the street and watched the people move around him. Soon, he found the Uchiha district and saw two guards. Before they could ask, he held up the pass, which they knew was a messenger pass. They nodded to the clone, and he smiled as he looked at them. "Can you point me to Mikoto Uchiha?" The two stiffened before the one on the left spoke with an edge to his voice. "What do you want with Our Lady?" The clone smiled as he held up the scroll and spoke. "Someone this village once called the Demon Fox has letters for her." Everyone around them stopped and looked at him, then the scroll in his hand. The man on the right spoke as his Sharingan flared to life. "Where is Naruto?" The clone didn't even flinch as he looked at him. "If that's the boy's name, then I didn't get it before he left. I was only paid to deliver this scroll of letters." The enraged Uchiha growled and forced himself to calm down. He could tell this guy had told the truth, turned while waving a hand. "Follow me. I will take you to her." The clone nodded and followed him. They walked through the streets and soon arrived at a large house. The clone waited outside as the man entered. The clone leaned on the side of the house as the man spun the scroll on his palm. After a minute, the door was kicked off the building, and Mikoto rushed out with her younger son. Sasuke, Naruto's first rival from his younger days, followed her out. Mikoto looked at the clone and he smiled as he looked at her. "I'm guessing you're Lady Mikoto." She rushed over and tried to grab his coat. The clone moved back. "Where is Naruto?" Mikoto yelled as she kept trying to grab him. But, soon Sasuke stopped his mother as the clone spoke up. "Easy now, miss. I don't know where the boy went off. All I know is I was paid to deliver this." The clone threw her the scroll as he moved away. He watched as she tore the scroll open and saw the seal. She placed it on the wall and slammed her hand on the seal. After a puff of smoke, a pile of letters fell to the ground. Mikoto threw the scroll away as she started going through them. As she was tearing through them, a large group of people came running into the Uchiha district. "Where is he?" The clone with his hands in his pockets turned and saw Kushina running at him. He raised an eyebrow as behind her was the group that had searched for Naruto after he'd left. "I found it." Everyone stopped as Mikoto pulled up a letter as she tore it open. As she pulled it out, Kakashi saw a letter with his name on the front. "Hey, there's one with my name on it." Kakashi rushed over, triggering a wave of people rushing to the pile of letters. Kushina, hoping one was for her or Minato, jumped at the pile as well. After a few minutes, Itachi came out of hiding when the letter with his name. By the end, Kushina was left empty-handed, as the others were all reading letters. "Naruto's got a girlfriend and she a 10 out of 10. Everyone looked at Mikoto as she jumped around happily as her third son had found love. She could have been happier as she'd finally got the answers she'd wanted. Her Naruto was safe and loved. She was a little sad she wasn't his mother figure but could make do with being his best aunt. Mikoto held up a Polaroid photo she'd gotten from a second seal on the letter. Everyone crowded around wanting to see the girl. They saw a photo of Naruto and the girl on a ship with the girl snuggled into his side. Everyone was happy and shocked to see the level of girl Naruto had gotten. "That my Gaki. And he's handsome and a gentleman, he's way better than his dumbass father or brothers. Oh, I can't wait to see the Gaki again." Enko danced around waving a fan that she pulled from her trench coat. Kakashi and Might Guy were dancing with her. Naruto had written to them that he'd mastered all the jutsu he took in MSTR2 Taijutsu as Itachi and Sasuke both looked shocked from his letter. Naruto had been offered a high position as something called a knight to protect a girl called Sibel by her father, a king, and refused it. Everyone looked at him before Hiruzen laughed loudly as he danced around. "My grandson is also mastering everything he can. My legacy has been passed on." Kurenai was focusing on this finishing school where he learned to be a true gentleman. She also wanted to know who the sisters and little sisters he talked about. But, what caught her attention was a woman who kept coming up. "I'd like to know who this Miss Grimwood is. She seems to be the root of Naruto's life." Everyone looked at her, then reread the letters and saw she was right. The start of each letter was about Tis Grimwood and how she was the mother he'd always wanted. Kushina had snuck behind Guy and quickly read the letter. Her fury grew as she looked at it but stopped when she saw the end. Sorry I didn't deliver the news myself, but I don't want to risk losing it. He didn't know what he'd do if he saw the village again. But, I'm sure we'll see each other again soon, Mstr Guy. Kuznia snatched his letter and started to read it. Guy tried to get it back but Kushina kicked him hard. She desperately wanted news of her son. Once she was finished, she threw the letter back as she rushed off to tell Minato the news she'd heard.